We'll start with a word of prayer. Holy Father, I thank you for your blessings, for your Spirit that guides us, for your grace and mercy. Lord, I pray that you guide our conversation. Father, help us to see your direction in terms of being a steward of both money and the other things that you provide for us. Lord, I pray that you would help our emotions and our own failures to not blur what you call us to. And I pray that you would also give us the wisdom we need to be better tomorrow than we were today. In your Son Jesus, I ask. Amen. Well, we have jumped deeply into debt. Conversation last week, and we're going to finish that up. A little play on words there, but try to take. We're going to finish that up today and shift into the response of how to limit this debt direction. We wrestled through kind of this definition, but one of the key components that we want to be mindful of, debt means that I'm spending money I do not have. So I'm borrowing from someone, or I'm taking, it's not just borrowing from a friend or from a credit lender or someone, but essentially I have to pay that back. I've made a commitment if I'm an honest person. Therefore, I've taken from the future, because I don't have it today. So some point in the future, I have to work or find a way to make that debt good. So I'm constraining my future is one of the key characteristics of debt. And so we want to make sure we are wise with the way when we choose to invoke that particular direction. And I think in many cases we're going to find it's not a wise direction. So we looked through a couple of scriptures, one being in Proverbs 22:7, where it says the rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender. And we looked a little bit about the way, not only from a systemic side, but really from the practical side, that when I am indebted, I'm constrained. Part of my future is constrained to take care of that. And just what we haven't discussed about, but it's worth throwing out there, you know how bankruptcy works in America? There are a couple types of bankruptcy. One works out a plan for how you pay off your debts. Another just removes all debt except for, I think school loan, I think, is still kept even in a Chapter 13. But when you die, that goes away. But nonetheless, there's a ways of removing debt in America. Oh, you're all familiar with that?
Well, some are not, but that's okay.
Okay, well, there are ways we can follow Chapter 7 bankruptcy or Chapter 13, which if you meet certain criteria, which allow you to not pay back your debt, or to pay it in a different rate or different approach is in Chapter 7. So the reason I bring this up is hopefully none of you have to go down that pathway, but if you do go down that pathway, is the government relieving you of your requirement to pay on a particular pattern relief of a debt morally? I'm asking, just because it may be legal, is it moral to not pay that debt back?
I think that could be argued both ways.
It can. That's why I ask good questions. Make you think. So argue it. For a little bit. I want to take about 2 minutes on this, 3 minutes. Yeah, Jeff.
Well, one thing it depends on is whether you will ever be capable, honestly capable of repaying the debt. That could be one factor.
Okay. So, with that in mind, you're arguing on the how do I actually make it right and eventually pay it off. Some may not be able to, some may. Those that aren't able to, one of the reasons we have this measure in place to protect, not go off to debtor's prison of sorts, but nonetheless, that doesn't necessarily address the moral side of that. Well, what are we doing when we take out debt? In terms of our promise, our word.
We promise to pay back. That's your moral side.
And so if I say I'm going to do something and then do not do it, is that a moral issue?
Depends why you can't do it.
It does.
Please explain.
So, for example, if a person needs to pay back money and they only make so much per year, and they've been diagnosed with terminal cancer and they're going to be dead in a month, there's no way physically they're going to repay that debt, even if they want to with all their heart.
I'm not arguing that whether they can or they cannot. I'm asking where it is moral or immoral. We're asking a moral argument. I understand the practical one. It's the reason we have it here. And so I'm not diminishing the service it provides. It has some pros, it has some cons, and we can deal with it. I'm asking the moral side of it.
If the person who has a car loan or a mortgage and gets terminal cancer and can't pay it back has not committed any moral violation. Period.
Why not?
Because they have cancer and they can't pay it back. They expected to, but they can't. Everyone in the equation expected, this isn't, I know where you're going. You're saying you don't ever get in that position. The bank and the car people understand that some people are going to get in situations where they can't pay it back. And lots of people are going to get in situations where they can't pay it back, where they are responsible for putting themselves in that situation. But the person who got terminal cancer, they didn't do anything wrong.
The reason I'm bringing this up, I want to preface because we are responding in a way that is familiar with our law. And if anything should be very clear, our law, while it may have had roots in morality, is not a moral code. What I want to get back to is that we have to dust off what is civilly appropriate or allowed versus the core framework of what God calls us to. And I would argue, I think rightfully so, that if I give my word and then I break that word, I have a moral dilemma. May not mean that I always fulfill my word. Actually, John Biggis gave me an interesting challenge once. He said he promised as a child that he promised as a newly married man, before he got married, that he would raise his children Catholic, specifically Catholic. And he says he broke that promise because he did not feel that was the right answer. And he says, so am I immoral that I didn't do what I said I would do because I felt that there was something better? It's a great question. It's a challenging question. And I think that John made the right choice. He said, I made a foolish promise, and now I'm on the other side of that, and I'm choosing to do something different. Jephthah, you could argue went the other direction with it. And I just don't want to make light of the importance of keeping our word in the midst of a society that has no value in it. In the legal realm, if I have a way to get out of a contract, it's legal, it's fine, as long as it's legally out of it. But if I have a moral obligation because I gave a verbal agreement, or I said I intended and I agreed to do this, I gave my word, and then I wrote it on paper, and the paper has a conflict or problem, so it can't uphold in court, but I still gave my word, I am morally obliged to fulfill my word. So I'm okay with an argument, but give me some arguments biblically, not emotionally. Yeah.
No, but so if you tell me, Tim, I'll come by this afternoon, and I'm gonna help you clean out your garage, okay? And then one of your kids gets really sick, and you need to bring them to the hospital because otherwise things may get dire. Have you broken your word to me?
Probably not, no.
Well, that's the point.
I don't think that's the point.
Well, I do. When we make promises, things can happen that change the circumstances. First of all, we should be careful about oaths and promises and swearing and all that.
Yes.
And I suspect that part of the reason for that instruction from Jesus is just this, that we can feel so bound to our word. Things can change. Circumstances can change that put people in different situations. I don't think I don't think I'm arguing emotionally.
I don't think you're talking apples to apples here, but I'll break that down and say, good, Jeff.
So there was the whole, every 7 years or 7 times 70 years or whatever, the debts were forgiven.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, clearly debts can be forgiven without you paying them back.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so God allows that.
And it was built into actually their code. If you took a slave out for 3, you paid based upon the amount of decrementing, what do you call that, where you're
Right.
declining balance or whatever the word is, but yeah.
So first of all, there are at least times when God allows a debt not to be paid back. But if you take your argument to its extreme, which maybe is where you're going, we should, since we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, we should never promise anything.
Okay.
If you take it too far.
So what I'm trying to underscore here, like when the example you bring up, hey, let's go do this weekend. Let's try this. Those are often wordings. We make a rough plan and we will go at it.
You're changing what I said. I said, you promised to come and help me clean up my garage.
I would consider that the commitment I'm making. There's a different level, I guess what I would argue, there's a different level of commitment of us making a casual agreement of what we're going to try and accomplish.
But he's not being casual.
I would argue that how often is it more like a contractual, I'm putting my word on the line, I will be there no matter what. Occasionally that happens, but that's not what I heard in your statement. It's to clear that there's an intent, there's a plan. The plan is to help. The way I heard you describe it is, I want to help you. So we're going to make a plan and we're going to work it out. I call you afterwards, had an emergency, we're going to have to do this another time. Is that all right? Yeah, that's fine. Take care of your kid. I don't consider that no matter what, I'm not putting you at odds or there's not an agreement here where there's a cost associated with change, nor was there a commitment given at the level that says, I'm committing to fulfilling this at all costs. Granted, maybe that we don't ever get there. Andrew.
It would be more along the same lines if you were, say, if it was his job to clean out garages and you hired him to do it and then he wasn't able to, then it would be more along the same lines. But no, even just being friends, no matter how much you were counting on it or how far in advance you did it, it's still considered a casual agreement.
So if we take the span here, if I told you, I'm coming over, we're going to do this, and then later I'm like, I have no intention of doing that anyway.
Well, that's different.
That would be different, and that's on the dishonest realm. It's not keeping the word, right? We agree? Are we agreeing on that part at least? Okay. I intend to do it. Something comes up and I need to change how I accomplish that. I consider that fair game. I have a commitment. Give you my word. This is locked in. I have to fulfill that. And I figure there's a much higher threshold if I back out. It doesn't mean that I can't back out and there's no other option. It means that there's a moral implication of backing out is what I'm arguing. And obviously we are often involved in moral arguments, so we got to be mindful of that. But I do consider if I break my word, it is a problem. Yeah.
When I was in Nashville, Georgia,
Yeah.
when you were a baby, one of the deacons there, who used to be a deacon and he'd sort of fallen away from the church, he came to see me because I'd been there a year and not seen him because I didn't know who he was other than spooks that were given to me. And he came to me and then he actually ran a business in town. He went bankrupt, lost the business, and he went back and paid back all of the money he owed the people. After he got free of it, he paid it back. But that was his moral. I want to be honest to what I've said. And then he was there talking to me, and he got me and my brother again, and we still worked. And, you know, we're just sensitive people. We all see the world differently. And we have to remember that and help us grow in the Lord. Because everything you do right, God esteems, and when you do wrong, He pushes it down.
Okay. Carmen.
Yeah, what I want to say is that the way I was brought up is in my new college class, about Robert Maxwell taught me that Christian's word is bound. But however, what I do want to say about money is the Bible says money is the root to all evil. I believe that
The love of money is the root of all
love
evil.
of money is the root to all evil. So I think that's a principle that we have to connect to this. If we are not paying our loan or whatever it is because we love money and we don't want to give up money, then I say that's immoral. But however, if you don't have the money and you work all your life, you can't get the job and you get terminally ill. Jesus, first of all, we're in church. We should talk more about Jesus and judgment, not necessarily morals, because Jesus is gonna wipe that out because because Jesus is a forgiving God.
Should I sin that grace may abound?
No, that's not sin.
So that deals with the morality of these questions, the things that we're dealing with. We need to make sure that, I'm not going to live a perfect life, given. I'm desperately in need of the grace of God, given. I'm grateful for that. However, I also want to grow I want to continually be sanctified, learning better and better how to make righteous decisions so that I don't so that grace that I desperately need is not for the same issue 1,000 times. If I need it, fine. I'm grateful it's there, but I need to be a person that is daily improving.
Okay, but how about someone who has paid all their debts except for one?
We're not saying this is you're going to go to the judgment seat and he says, you didn't pay that debt, you're going to hell.
No.
Not even remotely what we're talking about here. We're talking about how to know right from wrong. I'm trying to discern my path. And so what I'm trying to argue, and I think it's throughout scriptures, is that our word must matter. We should not be making foolish promises. Matter of fact, we shouldn't be saying, swearing by things to try to give it more impetus or value, but simply our yes should be yes. Our no should be no. It should not be, I'm going to give you some answer so that I can get you off my back and then I'm going to move on. That is dishonest, and that is a breaking of a word, and it is a problem. And so what I would argue when it comes to all aspects of life, even if it be, hey, I'm going to come over and help you this afternoon, common, I should be fully intending on doing that. And if I have to break that word, I should do my due diligence to make it right. I should call you. I should at least call you after the fact if it's an emergency. I should make that right. I should try and find another time where, if possible, I can help. I think of the same approach that if I make a commitment to someone and say, I'm going to borrow $1,000 from you, and I promise you, I give you my word, I will pay this back, then I need to do everything within my power to follow through with that. And if I don't, I do believe that there's a moral obligation there. Even in the example, Jeff, that you brought up, it was in the calculus tables for the forgiveness of the 70th year. It was built in. So they actually made agreements with that fully in knowledge. Now, granted, we could argue in America, we give it with the full knowledge that I could be bankrupt. I'm not so comfortable with that. Go ahead, Jeff.
So in 2 Corinthians, there's a passage that addresses this whole question, I think.
Okay.
I'll begin in verse 15 of chapter 1. First, so that you might benefit twice. I planned to visit you on my way to Macedonia and to come back to you from Macedonia, and then to have you send me on my way to Judea. When I planned this, did I do it lightly? Or do I make my plans in a worldly manner, so that in the same breath I say yes, yes, and no, no? But as surely as God is faithful, our message to you is not yes and no. For the Son of God, Jesus Christ, who is preached among you by me and Silas and Timothy, was not yes and no, but in him it has always been yes. So no matter how many promises God has made, they are yes in Christ. And so through him, the amen is spoken by us to the glory of God. Now it is God who makes both us and you stand firm in Christ. He anointed us, set his seal of ownership on us, and put his Spirit in our hearts as a deposit, guaranteeing what is to come. I call God as my witness that it was in order to spare you that I did not return to Corinth. Not that we loaded over your faith, but we work with you for our joy. So here's a case where a plan was made, it was made honestly, and things changed. And, you know, the whole point of moral discussions is to guide us in doing what we can do to the best of our ability. But things that are beyond our ability, or that we can't plan, or that God changes, like death. Death is different from backing out. They're not the same thing. Now you can argue they are, but from the standpoint of human responsibility, it's crazy to answer that a man who's made a promise and gets killed has sinned.
Well, actually, that's actually built into our code, and actually in our legal code. If you owe someone $1,000 and you die, before your wife gets that money, it comes out of your estate. So after death, people are paying off debts all the time. I mean, it's built in.
Well, but we're talking about the responsibility of the individual. We're not talking about the state. We're talking about his responsibility to pay it back.
Sure.
And if he doesn't have the money, and his wife doesn't, you know, I mean,
I guess what I want to draw out here is that this is not a legalistic answer. As you kind of mentioned, we're trying to figure out the principles by which we live. So if there's no principle that says I should honor that agreement, then once I've gotten the money, I move on. I don't even think about it. I don't care. If I die, I don't care. Hey, keep the money. Don't give it to Uncle Joe, because it's not. We're done with that. That's the problem. What I'm asking you to is if you recognize that giving my word actually matters, that I need to follow through with that, and then I do die, and my wife's sitting around she's got my life insurance policy paid out, and she's like, all right, what do we do here? Even her would say morally, oh, you know what, we owed that guy $1,000.
I'm not arguing with
We should take that
at all.
account.
I'm not arguing about that.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the personal responsibility of the person who's dead.
The dead person.
That's the subject. Not, you know, whether the money is still there. It's a matter of, have I made a moral mistake if I die before I can do something that I promised to do? That's the question. And I think it's silly to argue that it's a moral problem if I die before I'm physically capable of doing something.
So I don't misunderstand my argument. I'm not making a timeline issue on this. Like, for example, people die with mortgages all the time. Does that mean they were morally sinned because they still had a mortgage hanging over? No. I do say if they agreed to pay a certain amount of money and they're paying on it and they have the means to do it and they just stop, that's where the moral issue comes in.
Well, I'm not disagreeing with that at all.
Good. So then make sure we're on the same page then. Because if
Fair enough. And we're wasting time.
There's
We
a
need to
lot
go
of,
on.
everybody, there's too many different scenarios being all mixed up. I don't think,
So here's the principles I want to draw out. Giving our word should matter.
yes.
What he read.
That
Nobody's
directly
arguing with
begins to interfere or intersect with this idea. Because when I take out debt, I am giving my word. And so I want to be mindful of that there's more here than something pedantic. It is my character. It is my name. It is my word. And as a believer, that word represents God also to someone who I may be borrowing from who's an unbeliever. So there's an importance here. There is a moral direction that is involved here. And I don't want to make light of that. We take the examples of those who go bankrupt and pay off their debt when they're incapable of it. There's plenty of examples of that. I consider that admirable. I consider that someone aware of the moral dilemma they got themselves in, and they're trying to make it right. Is it the only answer? No, there's other answers. There's other people, and you know, they give account to God before them. But I would say that the commitments I made, I'm going to do everything I can to fulfill them. Because I believe that a moral constraint on myself. And I believe that's fairly biblical.
And nobody's arguing
Nobody's
with that.
disagreeing.
Yeah, nobody.
Nobody's disagreeing with
Nobody.
that. I'm not.
We're just saying if you don't have the means, if you don't have
So-
the means that before.
So that was the argument I started with, asking questions along those lines. And we're getting a lot of pushback. It sounds like that we're not accepting that part. If we're all aligned with that, I think we're pretty good moving forward.
Yeah.
So, sounds like we're good. Let's keep moving forward then. All right, so I want you to contrast a couple of approaches to needing money. One is, let's take a generic thing that, I'll say something more need-based. I need to eat, so I need food. So that's my scenario here. Let's say I take two approaches. One is, I have no money, I desperately need food, so therefore I'm going to borrow money to provide for my food. Scenario one. Fair enough? Everyone clear on what I'm saying? Scenario two. Turn with me to Psalm 25. We'll get to this. To thee, O Lord, I lift up my soul. O my God, in thee I trust. Do not let me be ashamed. Do not let my enemies exult over me. Indeed, none of these who wait for thee will be ashamed. Those who deal treacherously without cause will be ashamed. Now, this is in the context of enemies and war. However, there's plenty of examples like this that go well beyond simply winning in battle, but winning in life. This principle, let's say I take that principle and column number 2, it says I need food. However, I know that God has promised me that He'll provide for my food, clothing, shelter. And therefore, I'm going to take this passage, Psalm 25, and I'm going to crawl out unto thee, O Lord, I lift up my soul. You are my sustainer. You have promised me. And I don't believe I should make a commitment that I'm not sure I can fulfill. Therefore, I'm going to wait upon you to provide. Contrast those two cases. Is the one a fool? Is the other a fool? Are they both fools? Carmen?
One of the things we talk about often in this church is effort. And and I think that's a key. It's like a plus or equal sign in this equation, because comparing the two, like me, I had the blessing. I think I have the blessing because when I was young, my father taught me how to hunt, okay? I know how to hunt by different things. I think, however, you know, so I think anywhere where there's effort, I would say that, first of all, what I'm trying to get at is that prayer alone doesn't work. We see that in the Bible because it says, no, not in this situation, because it says if you don't work, you don't eat. It says, and hunting is a form of work. That, you know, I'm not saying that everyone can go in the forest and hunt.
Sure, you know, someone that's downtown Boston, you might get lucky and find a rabbit, but for the most part, you go out hunting, you're not going to find food.
Well, I believe truly that God will put something in your way. If that's
So more of a general framework of hunting. All right, so you're saying that the second scenario you resonate with. You think that's an acceptable way?
I think it's okay to borrow money, but yeah, I think you should try all means not to. And I think after you went to the forest to find that rabbit, you know, if it's God's will, you should swallow your pride and go ask someone, could I borrow?
Other thoughts? Jeff?
Well, I mean, I think to try to argue this scenario is about the same problem we've had in our church and looking at one verse and trying to conclude something. I mean, there's so much context around it. So if a person doesn't have any food, you have to ask, well, how did he get there? Is it because he's lazy? Is it because he's been taken captive and he's in the middle of the desert? It depends. You know, and how long has he been hungry, and has he made any effort to go and hire himself out so he can get money? I mean, that's a question. Is he physically capable of working? Is he in a community where people, you know, are willing to give and share, and has he taken the risk of asking someone for help? I mean, there are just so many questions. In some cases, the guy kind of deserves to be hungry.
So you're defining, same way with Carmen, you're defining what it means to wait upon the Lord, whether that be right or not right, which is fair.
Well, and how to wait. and
Yeah,
what that means.
absolutely.
That's what I'm saying too, is how do
Yep,
we?
I know both of you are saying that. Yes, that's a critically important question when I play this out in my day-to-day life. But I want you to contrast that with the first scenario, which is more the standard flow these days. If I actually have a credit card and I need to eat, well, I hate to do it, but I'm going to go rent a credit card, I'm going to borrow some money, I'm going to get some food on the table and take care of my family and move on. And yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say kind of the same thing. I don't think either scenario is wrong. I don't think the first scenario is sinning, but I would say that that's like my natural instinct. That's what I would think to do, because I think I want to take care of myself, I can fix this. But I love the idea of the second scenario because I realize like God put me on the earth to depend on Him, and I shouldn't have to try to do everything myself. I need to depend on Him. So not that I think the second scenario is more right. Like, back up on that. But I think it's cool to have the idea of depending on Him for so much faith and trust, where I think in the first scenario, I'm trying to do it myself. So it's not that it's wrong to go into debt for it, but it's the idea of like me trying to take care of my problems myself instead of depending on Him.
Okay. Well spoken. Deb?
I think one of the things God gave us is family. Because a week ago, I was driving and had something happen. A brother saved me from hurting myself. Then he brought me here and told me what happened. And I said, oh, I need to go home and go get myself taken care of. I need to go to the hospital. But I thought, I'll do this, and go. Then I did the first thing. I called my wife, and she stopped right there. And I stopped at Joe's so I wouldn't move anymore. And they took me on. But see, years ago, I had a guy who came here for help. We first knew, and he'd been misusing the church. And we helped him second time. And then I talked to him, he needs a family bigger than yourself. Because you're not in this alone. We're family. And family sees the problems. And if we help each other, we can lift each other up and all of that. And that's a gift from God.
So I'd like to pause for half a second here. I think your responses are good. This is what I'm looking for. I'm asking you a question, and I'm not asking a leading question here. I'm not trying to say there's one answer here. What I'm trying to bring out is that in any given scenario, which we could think of 1,000 ones, there are times where we're going to lean one direction or the other. And my goal here is not to solve all the scenarios. My goal is that we can begin to draw out the principles that God has given us to judge with, so that when I'm in that situation, I can have the right tools at my disposal to begin to reason in the right way. And so that's what we're after here. Now, there are going to be cases where we can pull up and say, this is absolutely sin. And there's other cases where you can say, this is absolute foolishness. There's other cases where you can pull up and say, this is the wisest choice. Most of the others are somewhere in between. But how do I deal with the muddled life reality of all the bills that I have, of all the responsibilities I have, if I can't start with the simple principles and answer the big questions? Because it is those principles that are going to drive me to be able to make practical decisions. If I don't have the principles clear, I'm never going to be able to answer a question about a credit card expense. Which is why I'm trying to pull us, let's take the biblical picture, use that to begin to reason through. What we've established so far, even just today, there is, keeping our word is critical and important. Other things that we've established, making a debt transaction is making a commitment that requires part of my future, and it is giving of my word. Other things we've established. There are people throughout scriptures, and this is one of, Jeff, as you bring up, rightfully so, we could pull out 100 scriptures here to give a big picture. This is not a scripture taken out of the blue by any stretch of the imagination. If we go through and took the time to pull out many of the scriptures that do this, which maybe we need to, and I'm happy to do that, we're going to see a picture of those that wait upon the Lord versus those that say, I have to solve this myself, there is no God. Now those are extremes. Now, what does it mean practically to play out waiting upon the Lord? It can mean a lot of things. We can't be lazy. Help our family. There's lots of principles we can draw out to help further clarify that. It doesn't mean that I'm going to sit around on my couch and wait upon the Lord to bring a delivery from Domino's. That's just foolishness. So please don't take a principle, apply it incorrectly in a bad situation, and then say the principle's ridiculous. Instead, let's see how we can take that principle and apply it appropriately to my life. That's my argument. Yeah, Carmen.
Yeah, so let me give you something that I'm not personally saying. And you know, there's a scriptural frame to what I'm going to say. First scripture comes from Matthew's. It says that God, don't worry about what you're going to eat or feed, that your heavenly Father will feed you.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, don't you feed the birds? And the birds eat daily.
Mm-hmm.
One of the framework that I want to get to is that, and then the second scripture I want to make a comparison, and the meat of my argument, you'll see what I'm talking about. Is Jesus about the gift of the talents? No, when he gave someone more than one, you know the one who used his talent, he gave more to.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm in a situation, okay. Let me tell you how I'll wait upon the Lord, and you know, and when this happens to me, I'm gonna pray that this is how I can go about it. All right, so I have $0, or I have a credit card, or something like that. I would go to the lowest place, and that includes. It sounds very low, and some people may judge it as immoral, but I would go to trash. You know, if someone throws something out in the trash. How are we to define that God did not put that there? Because ultimately, I think we overthink things.
Mm-hmm.
And how I might use the gift of the talents is that's a survival skill. Go in the trash. One of many ways you can feed yourself. People throw out leftovers all the time, and then from there I could see God making someone look up the widow like I would. And in a situation, if I saw someone in my trash taking out food, I'm not going to get a plate of food and bring it to them if I had it. So that's like God saying, "Well done, my good and faithful servant," to this person. Because it lets them in. So it's a very sad situation, but that's how I wait on the Lord.
Let me pull out a little what you're saying as we transition to the next part. It is the thresholds we set as reasonable and not reasonable that often end up pushing us into debt. And that's actually a lot of the reason that this question where I contrast someone who chooses to use a credit to pay for their bills versus someone who is waiting upon the Lord in whatever facet that makes. There's interesting dilemmas going here, but often it's the point that I find myself struggling is when I say, I'm going to wait upon the Lord, I'm going to wait upon the Lord, I'm going to wait upon the Lord, I'm doing everything I can, I'm waiting upon the Lord, and then at some point I realize, I don't think the Lord's going to answer me. Now, I have to grapple with that. How does that change my direction? At what point do I, if I say that maybe the Lord's, why isn't He providing food for me? Yet He's providing possibly good food in a local fast food trash or something. I don't know. There's all kinds of options that may be outside my realm of I'm waiting upon the Lord and He's showing a pathway and I'm refusing to do it because it's beneath what I accept. Or it's beneath, I've already worked 40 hours a week, that's sufficient. That's what US says, is 40 hours is a full-time job. Not that any of you probably even work that little. I doubt very few people only work 40-hour shifts. But nonetheless, we got countless kids going to college, getting lots of debt, not working because, oh, well, wisdom says it's probably not smart to work while you're, I mean, all these things come in and they mind, and suddenly we says, well, I can't do that. I'm doing the best I can given my limited sphere. This is often where a passage like Psalm 25 helps open up your mind. When you actually, instead of saying, how do I make this work, you instead fall before the Lord and say, Lord, here's my problems, give me wisdom to approach this. It's just a different perspective. And will that wisdom take you using a credit card? Possibly. I don't think we have clear, extremely defined ideas in scriptures that force one side of that or the other. There are definitely principles in there that affect it. And I mean, I think even Tim, you were saying last week, if you're just running up money and growing a credit card forever on day-to-day stuff, that's a problem. And I agree with that. But if you use a credit card and you pay it off at the end of the month to cover your budget, is that a problem? Probably not. As long as you're responsible, as long as you're doing, telling your money what to do and following through with it. The issue that getting into debt and promising your whole future out, there's a lot of scriptures that talk of the lack of wisdom in that. Both on the negative side and on the positive side. The negative side being slave to the lender. Positive side being a righteous man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. The negative side saying being in debt to no man. The positive side is the Good Samaritan who actually had enough money to pay for the bills, extra bills, out of his pocket. He just pulled it in and he had it because he had used his money well and was using it well in this particular case. So these are the principles by which we approach this. But if I look up and ask God for help, it's often interesting how the whole scenario begins to change. What is often in a crisis moment, my car just broke down. Oh no, what am I going to do? I got to get a job. I got to go down and buy a new car. And suddenly go out and spending $30,000 on a car you can't afford. Unless you have $30,000 in the bank, you want to go down and buy one. That's a different story. But how often do we end up in foolish decisions because instead of waiting upon the Lord and looking for wisdom, we let our anxiety and our limited, when we begin to limit the scope and says, well, I have no choice. Guess what? That's when you do something really stupid. I've been there. I've done it plenty. That's when you do something really stupid. I don't have a choice. This happened, this happened, this happened. This is it. And I got to make a decision now. That's dangerous. Yet, those who wait upon the Lord, those who call for godly wisdom, those who share with others, here's my problem. Can you give me a different way of looking at this? Am I missing something? These are good questions to ask where you draw in wisdom and begin to make better decisions. So, with that in mind, let's look at Colossians 2:14. Let me show a couple quick scriptures here that uses the term debt in terms of sin. It says in verse 14, actually begin 13, and when we were dead in your transgressions and the uncircumcision of your flesh, he made you alive together with him, having forgiven us all our transgressions, having canceled out the certificate of debt consisting of decrees against us and which was hostile to us, and he has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the cross. A very similar passage in Matthew 6:12, even in the prayer, where God's teaching them how to pray. He says, give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we have also forgiven our debtors, and do not lead us into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. And the parallel passage talks about sin. Now, these are a couple passages that use the very nature of sin is like a debt, in that it calls for payment. And that payment has to come in some form, and we are unable to pay for it, thanks be to God. He actually has paid our debt. By nature, we're people filled with debt. I find it interesting, the parallel that's used multiple times. I gave you two. There's many more times if you look through, that the very nature of sin is described in terms of debt. As a matter of fact, you could even argue the Romans passage where it says be in debt to no man, maybe more on the spiritual side, more so than the money side. But I tend to think it's quite comprehensive. Be in debt to no man except in love. I believe there's a principle in scriptures that calls us to, obviously keeping our word and some of these other principles, but it also says debt is foolish to pursue. Are there times where you need to, have to, feel like that's our only option? Sure. I'm not going to argue the details. But there's a principle that says pursuing debt is a foolish endeavor that doesn't bring good fruit. And so I think that's a principle that you want to use as you analyze your decision making, your budget, and the things you're spending on. Ask yourself the question, is this a godly direction? Is this a godly use of debt? Is this the right direction? And there's going to be times where you say yes, there's times where you're going to say no. I'm not here to give you a litmus test. But I do want to give you essentially a list of principles that help you make that decision. So add this one to your list. I also want to, since we're out of time, I want to draw out that it's interesting how this debt, sin versus actual money debt, using the same language, it's a similar pattern. What drives us to actually getting into debt? We could probably argue some scenarios, like buying a house and other things that we may argue are safer, better, less foolish, more wise. But let's take the bucket of foolish debt. What drives us to making foolish debt decisions? Since we're out of time, maybe I'll give you a quick answer, and you take it or leave it. That's fine. We can argue more about it next week. Selfishness often interacts with this. Whether it be something trivial, I'm at the grocery store and I don't have enough money to buy a candy bar, but I want one, so I'll buy one. Okay, a dumb example, but nonetheless, bigger decisions. I really need that car. No, I haven't saved up $30,000 for it, but I need it because I can't get to work. Therefore, and I want it now. And so I go in $30,000 in debt to buy a car that I can't afford. Is it a good debt? It's hard to argue. It's going down in value. Matter of fact, you drive it off the lot, it just dropped about 20-30%. You sell it back the next day, you've lost significantly. Now granted, if you got $30,000 in the bank, that's a decision you can make. Then you have to ask, is it wise to use that type of investment? But you think about that, that's often that trapped selfishness saying, I want this now, I want it easy. I don't have to think much more about it. I don't want to go to the work of finding the used car that's going to work for $3,000 that I can afford to pay out for until I can raise the money to buy the $30,000 one I want. Most people don't reason that way. Yet I would argue that selfish motivation is often what drives us into debt decisions. A similar side that comes closely with that, the selfishness is one driver, and the second one that is we don't trust. Do I believe that the God that, in all of his wonderful promises, is really real? That he's really going to deliver on what he says? When he says, I'm going to provide for your food, clothing, and shelter, am I willing to put myself at stake for that? Or am I going to do whatever I can to protect myself? If I believe that God is really real, it doesn't make me lazy. It doesn't make me anything else sitting around on the couch. But it constrains my activities. So I think these two areas, one is selfishness and one is lack of trust in God and his promises, that often drive us into debt decisions. More often possibly than the good reasoning that may say, hey, this is the right direction. So anyway, we're going to move on from debt beginning next week. We're going to look at how do we actually wait upon the Lord, trust in the Lord, not be selfish, yet get what needs to be done. I'm looking through a way of, well, essentially the nature of contentment. So that's where we're going to begin next week. And if we make it through in a week, we'll talk about giving after that, and then we will take some fill-ins that haven't been covered yet. Any questions or comments before we close?
I know we're over time, I'm sorry, but I think the third thing, and hopefully this segues right into your next class, is that it's not trusting God or not understanding what God wants. It's that our desires are misaligned with what we actually know God. So the $3,000 car is fine. I know that. It'll get me to work. God has provided that, but I want the fancier car. Mm-hmm. And I guess that's selfishness in a way, but it's also just not, it's not aligning our minds with God's mind. Yep. You can understand it and know it, yep, and even believe it and still want what you want. Yep.
Absolutely. And that is definitely where we're headed.
So to get to contentment, you have to get your mind aligned.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amen.
Thank you. All right, let's go to the word of prayer. Holy Father, I thank you for your goodness and for your wonderful promises. Lord, help us to believe. But help us to make righteous decisions and to wait upon you and let you be our source of blessing, and not only by our own hand. Father, I pray for guidance as we continue to look for how to be content next week. Lord, I pray you give us the understanding, the rubric for how to think, how to embrace you more faithfully, more consistently, to be truly content. In your Son Jesus, I ask these things. Amen.
Amen.